Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming to hang out tonight. Welcome to Entropy Emporium. A couple of quick channel announcements before we kick things off and get things started. First and foremost, we are raising money for the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. We will be doing that for the foreseeable future. We know why they're doing important work on the ground. We know what's going on over there as much as we possibly can. It is very, very well documented, and so we cannot just turn a blind eye. In these trying times, community is what's going to save us. So if you can, donate. If you can't donate, show up and advocate. If you can't show up and advocate, take care of the people around you and take care of yourself. That is the important work that we have to be doing right now. Additionally, if you like what we do have a Discord server. You can come and hang out with us. You can come and see what we're all about. You can come and yell about your favorite stuff or show us pictures of your pets or show us pictures of you and we can tell you how hot you are. That's pretty much all that we do over there. It's a really good space to be. It's a lot of fun, very positive. Finally, if I can get to it, a couple of content warnings for this particular game. Godkiller Desecration deals with mature topics which can include graphic depictions of violence, death, betrayal, gaslighting, sex with fade to black, religious themes, drowning, self sacrifice, manipulation, and mind control. Particularly for this episode, the graphic depictions of violence are going to be present. We have our safety tools on our side of the screen. We take care of ourselves, we take care of each other. We ask that you do the same. So if at any time things become too much, you feel overwhelmed, you're not into the content that we're producing, take a step back. There's other things that we do here on Entropy Emporium that could be more up your alley. We want to make sure that everybody is safe and having a good time. That is what's most important to us. I was going to say, any questions before we get started? But the chat, I guess if you have questions, put them in chat, but I can't hear you right now. But let's go ahead and kick things off. So, first of all, I will hand it over to my God Killer for introductions.
Thank you, Kian. Hi, I am JD, pronouns he, they, and I am playing our god killer, Talon, pronouns any, all.
And then I didn't say it at the top, so I don't have to say it once again. My name is Kian. My pronouns are they, them. I am playing everybody that is not the God Killer. So, gods, NPCs, everything else that my God Killer does not get to play. Um, I use a lot of pronouns because of it, so feel free to use whichever pronouns are up your fancy. Uh, I think that's all that we got to do. I
I
think we
think it
can just
is.
get started. It feels so quick when there's only two people, so I'm always like, wait, there's more. There's not more. We have covered everything. So we will pick up exactly where we left off. And what we left off with was the doors sealing in the Golden Temple. This immaculate, awful, just over the top, hideous, golden plated temple that you have found yourself in with Bebium, the god of excess. The doors were sealing shut as the plaza in front of the temple was beginning to fill with water. And you had a general understanding, though not super familiar, with Bayon, the god of movement. This could be a sign from Bayon, is kind of what was understood. The temples were shut, and you got to see the side of Bebium that you didn't expect, this very almost humane side who was comforting his followers and checking in on them and making sure that people were okay and knew that things would be okay. And just when everything seemed like, all right, we can stick it out here for however long we need to while whatever awful thing happens in the plaza that these people seem to be familiar with and knew was happening, the altar at the front of the temple cracked. How are you feeling right now, Talon, with everything going on, with what you've seen, with this suddenly earth shattering sound of this giant slab of marble cracking in two and hitting the ground? What's going through your brain?
There are so many things going through Talon's brain in this moment, from what they were seeing outside right before they ran in to the fact that they had not wanted to enter this temple to begin with, despite, we'll say, rather significant urging from the god. And then there was confusion when he saw that gentleness, that comfort, when he recognized that is the type of person he would want to be in a moment like this, being able to provide that to others. And now there is just panic in seeing the crack in the altar and really hoping that she is not the cause of this, but also she doesn't know if that's better or worse than something else being the cause.
Certainly, our god killer showing up in a new city could have nothing to do with what's happening. It's fine.
Never.
Of course
Absolutely
not.
not.
Talon has never done anything wrong a day in their life, okay?
It's true.
You are seeing everybody slowly come to a halt and looking toward the front of the altar, and then looking to Bebium, this humanoid with a goat head and 4 arms, wearing this very colorful outfit full of many different patterns, who is also standing and looking at the altar, expression completely blank. And as you had noticed before, one of those eyes kind of glances in your direction with that square rectangular shaped pupil, looks over at you, looks back at the altar, looks at you again. And then in a very caring, controlled voice, Bebium simply calls out, "Remain calm. Everything is," and then stops. Because something new is happening at the front. Water is beginning to trickle from the altar itself. People immediately begin to panic. I would like for you to use the move Recognize a God. Because this is different. We know that Bayon is the god of movement, the god of water. But this is something different that you're not quite sure. When you want to recognize the signs or influence of a god of the cradle, roll 2d6 and add 1 for each true statement. You are in or near their domain. That is true. You're familiar with their gospel. Do you think you're familiar enough with Bayon's gospel to call that one truth? Okay.
No, definitely not.
It'd be bad if you didn't know. I'm gonna go ahead and give you that one. I think it'd be
Yeah.
pretty bad if you didn't know this. So roll 2d6, add 2.
All right. That is a 5 and a 1 plus a 2, so an 8.
Okay. You get a clear interpretation of the omens, and you get to ask a single follow up question of your choosing, and I must answer honestly. Water is gurgling up, and it's increasing in speed. It is starting to come faster and faster. Something like this happening in the temple of another god at their altar. For once, Talon can kind of breathe easy. There is no direct cause that Talon could have done this, because this is a god taking action against another god. This is one god entering the domain of another and damaging it very intentionally. What would be your follow up question?
The first question that crossed my mind is, when has something like this happened before?
You've never seen it with Kalaris. That never happened. You know that there are 3 gods who exist in this city, the city of Noth, and somehow cohabitate and somehow make it work. The only times in recorded history that this has happened are times when the cradle has changed forever, when a god has killed another god. And that god's death has somehow warped the landscape or the entire existence of humanity. Their body becomes this giant carcass wherever they fall. It's never a good thing. Never once has a god entered another god's domain to talk, to have a conversation, to make friends. They show up to kill and to consume each other. And water is starting to flow faster and faster from this altar. And you can see people starting to panic. Some people are starting to take scrambling steps backwards. Some people are looking to Bebium to see how he is responding. And he is simply standing there watching. And then you start to feel that oppressive energy again. The energy that gods seem to exude from themselves that forces you to do what they want when they want you to. But this one is interesting once again. Bebium surprises. You see people being swept by this energy away from the altar. Not aggressively, Not like you have been thrown by this god and other gods, but very protectively, trying to gather people into one spot, seeming to try and guard them from whatever is about to happen. And then the altar explodes, and there is no protecting people from something like that. You see chunks of marble flying through the air. You see them strike different people. People are getting bloodied and battered. People are throwing themselves over their loved ones, trying to guard them from all of this sudden explosion and chaos. What do you do?
I think, like the coward Talon has been called before, they go to dive for shelter for themselves.
I think that makes a lot of sense. This is something. What do you do when chunks of marble are hurling at your face? But try and protect yourself. You try to cover. Even though there are other people around you, I think others understand that you can't be a hero at all times. In theory. The God Killer might be an exception. There's probably this different expectation for our God Killer. But in theory, nobody can be a hero all the time. That's not the job of a mortal. A mortal's job is to survive, especially in this world where gods walk amongst them. Marble is exploding everywhere. Water is starting to gurgle up from the ground faster and faster. You see that as people have thrown themselves to one side and another, where the water touches them, people are beginning to dance. And they are crying and weeping and wailing as they do. People are screaming in horror and fear. They're trying to climb for higher ground. There are children that are scrambling onto their parents' shoulders to try and stay away from the water. And it doesn't seem to take much. It's a small bit of that water that touches them, and they start to move and dance. You can hear the doors at the front of the temple shaking as though something is trying to get in. And Bebium calls out in a very strong voice this time, "That is enough." And the water starts to recede. It doesn't disappear. The people who are dancing are able to catch their breath, take a couple of steps. They look down, they see that their feet are in their own control again. Most of them sit, breathing heavily, trying to figure out what to do next. And you hear a different voice echoing throughout the temple, one that you have not heard before. It's a very whimsical, very soft voice. Sounds almost musical, which is, it seems the tone that comes across right now is entertained, which is unnerving in this moment, given everything that's going on. But this voice calls across, "Oh, Bebium, you want me to stop when you've brought in the God Killer to consult with them?" And Bebium looks at you directly once again and looks away. "I've not brought this creature to consult with. You're the one who is attacking my temple." And out of the water, this entity starts to rise and take shape in front of you. Bayon, the god of movement, what you see first is a giant scepter that rises with them. Gold filigree. They are a humanoid person, long golden hair and beautiful tresses, and they've got filigreed golden horns. Gold is a running theme here in Noth, the city of excess. Everybody is decorated, done up to the nines all the time, the gods included. Bayon takes one step and then another out of the water, and you can see people flinching and trying to back away. What is going through Talon's head in this moment, as she is confronted not with one, but two gods in the same space?
Well, Talon got the slightest bit of relief in recognizing that their mere presence was not responsible for this. Now they have confirmation that their mere presence is responsible for this. And so that fear is still very present, especially with Bebium looking directly at him and recognizing what he is. And there is certainly a part of her that is trying to figure out what type of escape would even be possible, because now there are two gods that recognize her as a god killer. and he is trapped inside a temple with both of them. And I think he's also thinking back to his last encounter with a god and the carnage of the people that followed. The fact that they were merely present in that god's domain.
Are you trying to take any action, or are you observing for right now?
I think primarily observing, but backing away just a little bit, slash trying to somewhat lose themselves amongst the others there.
I have one more question for you. Has Talon ever prayed for guidance? Have you ever prayed to a god in stressful moments like this?
I think the only time Talon has ever prayed to a god was praying to Actos while in mourning.
I think that makes a lot of sense, in large part because you were much younger when your parents passed. And Actos is considered a kind god, a benevolent god, even, um, being a comfort to those who are in mourning. And you're not quite at the point of praying, but that memory kind of flashes in your mind of Actos. I. Hmm. I'm going to ask you to use the move, feel someone or something out. When you try to fill out a person, place, or thing, say what you want clarity about and answer one. The GM will give you the clarity you seek as they answer the other. I know that you haven't asked for clarity about something, but I think that this will be a good time to use this move. So would you like to answer what feels welcoming on the surface in this space as something draws your attention away from these two gods? Or what feels dark or unnerving when I peer deeper?
I think I'll go for what feels welcoming on the surface.
Okay.
And I would imagine that primarily comes in the form of thinking about how Bebium has been protecting those who serve them and those who worship them, and seeing the people interact with one another, even if it's something as typical as a parent trying to protect their child, that the reminder of that is what feels comforting, what feels like this might not be as desperate a situation as it is increasingly feeling.
What feels dark or unnerving when you peer deeper is that your attention is drawn to one side and you notice a figure. They're draped in cloth from head to toe. You cannot see their face. You cannot see any defining features about this person. And they seem to be holding, at first glance, what looks just like a children's toy. And then you look closer and you realize it is specifically the toy that Bebium had produced for a child earlier to bring that child comfort. They seem to be holding that in their hand in the moment. And I think what feels dark or unnerving is that neither god notices this figure, which means that somehow this figure is able to stay out of their line of sight and out of their domain while existing in this space. Because you cannot really be in a god's domain aside from the caves in Angelfell that seem to be for some reason out of Colaris's domain, and that seems based purely on physics. But you cannot be in a god's domain without them being aware of you. Otherwise, how would these gods keep finding you? You notice this figure off to one side, and you think again of Octos, and you think again of mourning and of comfort and things like that. And there's something that is lining up, but it can't quite connect yet. But those thoughts are starting to come up. And just as you're beginning to pull the pieces together, Bayon steps into your line of view, holding that scepter. And they hold the scepter out and they put it under your chin and tilt your head up. And they're keeping you at a distance. and you're not quite sure if that's just to observe the way that a predator would observe their prey, or if it's out of caution. But Bayon simply says, "So you're the little god killer that's causing so much trouble across the cradle. What's your name?"
My name's Talon.
And tell me, Talon, are you just going on a rampage, trying to kill every god you see?
The rumors about me have been greatly exaggerated, if that's what you think.
If that's what I think, so you're calling me a liar.
I'm saying if that's what you've heard, that is not accurate.
Then what is?
I am traveling the cradle. That is all.
To what end, Talon?
To see the world, to figure out my place in it.
And surely your timing of leaving Angel Fell, of leaving your god in his domain, coward that he is, has nothing to do with the new god being born. Surely that is just a coincidence, yes?
Of course, yes.
The scepter moves very abruptly to one side and strikes you across the cheek, and you feel as though it would throw you across the room, but that force holds you in place, and you're forced to stand there and just feel that sting on your face. Do not lie to me, child. Our vision goes farther than you could possibly imagine. I know that's why you're traveling. So tell me, what would a follower of Kalaris be doing looking for a new god?
Clearly, a follower of Kalaris would be following Kalaris's orders.
Hmm. Do you hear that, Bebium? And Bayon kind of calls over their shoulder. It sounds like our little brother Kalaris has a plan. And Bebium, from their space, they have not moved, even though Bayon has approached you. They're still standing at a distance, says, "Do you think that has anything to do with us? You've entered my domain, Bayon." And Bayon looks surprised for a moment and then lifts up one hand, and a surge of water comes directly for that crowd of people who were trying to hide from the explosion of marble a moment ago. And as soon as the water touches them, they don't dance this time. They start to burn. They start to burn as though it's an acid, and they are screaming and trying to run away, but that force again is holding them in place. And Bebium finally acts. He raises one of his forearms, holds the palm out in front of him, pushes, and this resounding energy shows up and it breaks on Bayon's back, and Bayon kind of stumble forwards closer to you, kind of leaning over you. And you can see in Bayon's eyes satisfaction. He is happy that they have pushed another god to this limit. Because yes, Bayon did enter the domain of another god first, but Bayon did not strike first. And that is not something that you would know instinctually about gods, but you would kind of understand it about mortals. Somebody gets up in your face, that's one thing, but as soon as somebody swings, that gives permission for it to be an all-out brawl. And that is what Bebium has just done. You have a brief moment where you can see the satisfaction on Bayon's face. You can see that action is about to happen, and you can only imagine the destruction that is going to take place. Do you do anything in this moment?
Talon just instinctively yells at Bebium, "That's what he wants!"
Do you say that you're acting impulsively?
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
Usually.
Okay. When you act impulsively, describe the emotion that drives you and answer one. The GM will tell you something you didn't notice until now as they answer the other. So, what emotion is driving Talon right now?
I would say right now it's predominantly fear.
And would you like to answer what advantage do you seize or what trouble hits you hard and fast?
I think I'll go with what trouble hits you hard and fast, and I think that is in essence the fact that Talon is still right here in the thick of it as they're yelling this.
I think that makes perfect sense that you are exposing yourself essentially. For a brief moment, Bebium seemed to have forgotten about you, and you are making it loud and clear to him that you are still there, and you can still be a threat, you can still be a tool, you can still be leverage or a hostage. Whatever it is that either of these gods needs you to be, you have reminded them that you are a pawn on this board. What advantage do you seize? You have reminded them that you can be a chess piece here. You have no idea what either one has planned for you. But Bebium has something planned because very suddenly there is that same wall of energy between you and Bayon, and it pushes you back 10 feet. Not aggressively, not throwing you, but you slide your feet back 10 feet. You keep your ground. You are kind of closer to this other crowd of people. And then Bebium pulls that energy back and it slams into Bayon, and you watch. You have a first-hand view right up front as the skin on Bayon from shoulder to hip is sliced open with an unseen claw. And this golden ichor starts to flow out of him. And he turns and wails and rages. And water explodes and turns into ice all around him. But Bayon is considered the cruelest god, one of the worst ones that you can possibly come across. They are not going to strike Bebium. They're going to hit where it hurts, and that means hitting Bebium's followers. As this ice sprays out, you watch as the person next to you immediately goes straight through their head, thuds into the back of the wall behind them. They slump to their knees, fall forward onto the ground. You see limbs rendered from their joints. You see men and women and children and people, this mass of individual people, struck down violently and aggressively and without any remorse. And Bayon begins to laugh at this chaos. And amidst it all, for some reason, Talon, you are untouched. You're not sure. It doesn't feel like you're being spared. It feels like you are meant to sit and watch as this destruction and death happens around you. What's going through Talon's head right now?
I think a big question that keeps going through their head is why me? Why not me? Why am I the one who is being left unharmed? Is that the gods? Is that something else? Is that luck? Whatever it could be, they don't understand why they deserve to be spared. They also are thinking that that may not be a gift given what is happening and given how gods use mortals. And then they're just thinking, what do I do? How can I help? And they're trying to reach for the people who are being mutilated in these ways. And they're also thinking, I have nothing I can do to help. What good is pressure on a wound when there are so many more wounds that I can't address?
What good is pressure on a wound indeed? People are falling to their knees and begging Bebium for help. I would like once more to ask you to use the move Recognize a God. You are in or near their domain. I would say not yet. You're familiar with their gospel. You absolutely are in this case. But it wouldn't be bad if you didn't know. So roll 2d6 and add +1.
That is a 10.
Okay. On an overkill, you realize your divinity is actively trespassing against them right now. The GM will say how. The violence that is falling down around you reminds you of Musin for a moment, the god that you met in the city under the bridge, that giant bearded vulture. But it's even more senseless than that, because these are people who, at least with Musin, in the most twisted possible way, but the only way that a mortal could possibly logic it is that with Musin, it was about hunger. It was about consuming. There was a purpose to that, as fucked up and terrifying as it was. And here, there is no purpose. There is no reason for these people to be suffering and dying the way that they are. But they are, simply because another god is willing it. You can feel anger growing in you as this is happening. How familiar is Talon with anger?
It's not a common emotion for them.
Mm-hmm. I didn't think so. Talon is runs on a lot of different emotions, but anger hasn't really come up for them. And yet you feel it kind of in deep in your bones. This anger about why is this happening, about why is this happening. And then louder than that is grief. You start to feel sad for these people around you, for the way that the gods expose themselves and cause chaos and violence simply by existing. There is a grief there. And you try to tamp that down because it doesn't serve you in this moment. Even if there's only one wound that you can address, try to address the one. But when you go to tamp down that grief, you are reminded of that shrouded figure. It comes to the forefront of your mind. And you are reminded that that figure is what people tend to see when they interact with Actos. And at the same time that you kind of make this realization and you start to connect these dots, why would Actos be in this domain, the god of grief, the god of mourning? Bayon looks at you and says, "You've been touched by another. What other god have you spoken to?"
I've spoken to several gods in the past week, but please stop.
You would ask me to spare these people.
Yes,
And why should I? What is their life to mine? What is their existence to my own entertainment?
this is entertaining.
Bayon kind of cocks her head to one side and smiles and says, "But of course it is," and then holds their hand out and another spike shoots through and impales somebody in the gut. And they fall to the ground screaming. Is this not entertaining to you?
I believe the answer to that is written clearly across my face. No, it's not entertaining to me. What is it with all of you gods just seeing us as your puppets? In life and death? You could do so many incredible things. And yet you choose to make us dance and die. And some of you choose to not even let that be the end.
Bayon seems to grow as he approaches you until they are wide shouldered. Their arms taking up more space than they should. You can hear Bebium in the background, and it's very disconcerting because it sounds like Bebium is starting to laugh. And there was at least one god that you thought you could reason with, but you have no idea why Bebium would be laughing in this moment. But Bayon approaches you and reaches down and grabs your face and kind of pulls your chin forward. I have existed for thousands of years, mortal. Do you think I haven't already spent my time doing kinder things? This is simply the phase of my existence that I'm in. Torturing and killing are, to be honest, rather boring at times. But at least it keeps me busy. I did kind things for mortals. I spared them. I gave them gifts. And all that it got me were a handful of ungrateful wretches begging me for more. Why would I go back to that life when I could have this? And snaps his fingers, and water erupts once again, and people begin to dance.
You say this is just the next phase, the current phase of your existence. Have you considered the fact that the current phase of existence that each of you gods are in might be exactly why there's no need for a god killer?
Bayon flinches when you say that, lets go of you, takes a step back and then another, and calls out, "Do you hear that, Bebium? Do you hear this mortal threatening me? I thought you said you weren't in cahoots." And then turns back to Bebium, and Bebium stops laughing, steps to the side so that he can see you directly, and says, "You're trying to reason with my brother is rather entertaining to me. Tell me, Godkiller, do you think you could kill us both?"
I don't know.
Would you like to give it a shot?
And Talon hesitates. They look over at the people, however many are still standing, or if not standing, are at least alive. And then they just look at Bebium and say, "I have no quarrel with you."
Bebium has held a very still expression this entire time, but you can see the corners of that goat mouth starting to curl up in a smile, and the smile continues to extend, and it's too wide, it goes back too far. But all four palms go palm up, and he takes a step back and gestures broadly over at Bayon. And Bayon looks a little concerned, but Bebium continues to step back, goes all the way to the mantle, to the altar that was cracked, finds a sort of flat surface, hikes onto it, sits down, crosses one leg over the other, kind of props up their chin. We talked so much about entertainment, Godkiller. Entertain me. And Bayon turns to you, and the edge of the scepter sharpens, and they kind of twirl it around in their hand and hold it sharpened and pointed toward you. What do you do?
Talon recognizes that in so many ways this is not dissimilar from the situation he found himself in with Deetlon when he didn't want to fight. He didn't want to have to defend himself, yet he was there, and it was either do that or die. And so I think with that, Talon responds to that by taking out the small pocket knife and holding it up as though that is enough to defend her.
Bayon begins to laugh. You plan to kill me with that thing? You used that to kill Ditlan?
No, actually, I used my fist.
Hm. Perhaps Ditlan deserved to die then, if he was done in so easily. But let's make this fair. And Bayon shrinks their size down, and they make themselves about your height, about your shape and size. At least now we're even. And goes to strike and slashes out with the sharpened end of the scepter directly at you. What do you do?
Talon tries to dive out of the way.
I would say that's acting impulsively. It's not inflicting violence, certainly not. But I would say that that is acting impulsively. Do you seize an do you want to answer? Do you seize an advantage, or do you want to answer what trouble hits you hard and fast?
I'll answer uh, the advantage.
Okay,
And I think with that, the advantage Talon does seize is to get the fuck out of the way and avoid at least that first blow.
sorry, had to delete a message. Um, you successfully roll out of the way and avoid the chaos. Um, at least in this moment of that very first strike. The trouble that hits you hard and fast is that one end of the scepter is pointed, the other is rounded, and it seems to show. I gotta remind myself what it looks like. It seems to be a sapphire at one end of the scepter, which is interesting. Not necessarily completely out of the norm, but interesting. But that does make it a two-ended weapon. And so the other end of the scepter comes through and smashes you in the gut. And you feel the wind kind of knocked out of you as you stumble backwards. You're not cut, but that certainly didn't tickle. Bayon is still laughing as he swings it back around and reaches for you to grab you by the collar and drag you in close, and then pushes you, but puts some of that godlike energy behind it, throws you back up against the wall. Go ahead and take one strain and remind me how many strain you have.
I'm at 3 strain.
Okay, good to know. Two more strain, and we have a move that we have to take. So, um, and just as a reminder for you, because this has never come up before, but I noted it today. Oh, where are my notes on you? I have so many notes. Your mortal trigger. When you put your own life or limb on the line to help someone dangerous, you clear all strain. So just keep in mind that there are mechanically ways that you can clear your strain. Um, or we can run with it until you get to 5 strain and see what happens. I'm totally down for either option. Um, Pushes you back, throws you back against the wall, rushes in again. Are you trying to attack, or are you still trying to avoid?
Still trying to avoid. Talon is definitely, I mean, they were never on steady footing, but they are still very much, on kind of the back leg, just trying to dodge and weave and get out of the way as much as he can.
You are bobbing and weaving, rolling across the ground, ducking under strikes and blows. You're doing a pretty good job. You're actually able to keep pretty well pace, or perhaps Bayon is allowing you to keep pace with him. You're unsure. But whatever it is, there's not many blows that are striking you. And then that sharp end of the scepter gets dangerously close, gets right up to your face. You can see the point coming directly for your eye. And something happens that you didn't expect. It stops, but not because Bayon has stopped it. Bayon continues to push forward, and you can see the sharpened end of the scepter beginning to disintegrate, as though there's some kind of a wall that it's grinding against, and is slowly grinding itself down into a softened, shorter nub. Bayon takes a step back and inspects the scepter, kind of brushes a hand across the end of it. It sharpens back up, but looks at it and looks at you. What god have you been touched by? He asks again.
And Talon answers as honestly as she understands in that moment and says, "You already know that I serve Kalaris."
Kalaris couldn't do this. And Bayon opens their mouth, closes it again, opens it again. It's very human in a really unnerving way when a god can't find their words. But that is what is happening. Bayon keeps kind of starting and stopping. And Bebium, from their place on the altar, calls out. Excuse me, from his place on the altar, calls out, I think you already know the answer to that, Bayon. I think you know what god has touched our god killer here. You see that little train that you saw Bebium give to a child earlier, that you saw that shrouded figure holding. You see it kind of roll across the ground between Bebium and Bayon, and you, since you're closer to Bayon. And Bayon takes one step back and another stumbling step back, looks at the train, looks at you. When did you meet her? Not Kalaris. Actos. When did you speak with Actos?
When I was just a child.
And you've been touched by her since.
I suppose so, if that's what you're saying. I had no idea.
Aeon does something that is. Actually, I won't say what it feels like because I'll be curious to ask you. Bayon drops their scepter. And then they bend a knee in front of you. Drop the other knee until they're kneeling in front of you in this human form. They sort of sit back. And then they drop their head to the floor in front of you. What is Talon thinking right now?
Talon is just thinking, what is happening? Seeing this sign of seemingly subservience from a god, and in fact, I think Talon's instinctive reaction would be to look behind them to see who must be standing there, because clearly this gesture is not meant for him.
You don't see anybody behind you, but you do see the edges of some kind of a shroud, this pale cloth that keeps showing up more and more that you're seeing. You look over and you see that Bebium has also knelt down and placed their head to the ground, as best a goat can. It's a little bit of an awkward position for him, but placed his head to the ground and is kneeling in your direction. And the followers of Bebium, those who are still alive, those who can, assume a similar position. You don't think that they understand what's going on. They certainly don't. You're pretty confident, actually, because you don't know what's going on. But Aeon looks up at you again, and their voice almost shakes when they ask you very simply, will you spare me?
That is the hardest question that Talon could be asked right now. Because on the one hand, she has no interest in bloodshed. She never has. That wasn't something in her makeup, at least as far as she knew. And all violence and harm that he has caused were in moments of desperation. And yet, he also can't stop thinking about the horrors that just occurred. And if that was what just occurred in front of them, how many horrors happened before and how many will happen after? And so I think Talon's response to that is, do you think you deserve to be spared?
Bayon looks stricken. There's grief, there's fear, there's anxiety. And then there's anger. You have asked such an interesting question that I'm having to really reach for Bayon to think how they would answer this. This is such a good question. There's anger in Bayon's face and in his eyes as they sit up quickly, come to a full stance, take a few steps back. Do I deserve to be spared? What kind of a foolish. Why would I even ask you? You couldn't kill me if you tried, could you? And you can see that even then they are conflicted. They're struggling to say that. It's almost like they're reaching for something to believe in, which is a very mortal thing to do. Are you asking me if I would stop? Of course not. Are you asking me if he would spare me, and points over to Bebium? I don't know. I'm asking you, will you spare me? I'm debasing myself, putting myself on my knees for a mortal. I don't think it matters if you would spare me, I'm realizing. Because I don't think I'll spare you. And Bayon moves to strike. What do you do?
I think with that, Talon moves to strike as well.
Okay. I would say that counts as inflicting violence. I'm sorry, please continue.
Yeah, no, that was all I had.
Okay. When you inflict violence on someone, roll 2d6, add 1 for each true statement. They wish you harm. Absolutely. You're desperate. Are you desperate?
I think this would count as desperate.
Okay. And is it personal?
I think it is because of the destruction that Talon has seen.
Okay. So go ahead and roll 2d6 and add 3.
Okay. That is a 7.
Okay. This part of the fight ends on your terms. Bayon goes to strike, and I will say that you parry and you push the scepter out of the way. You're able to avoid that blow, but you go to strike back. What does it look like when you go to strike a god? And how far do you take it?
I don't think Talon takes it very far. In fact, I think it is almost a moment that would feel laughable if not for everything that has happened and the stakes at play, because Talon has been on the defensive this entire time, and Bayon has now indicated that despite the fear that Talon saw from them, he's also trying to convince himself that Talon can't do him any harm. And so I think that the harm Talon does in this moment is very minimal, but at least compared to what he could potentially do as the God Killer, I think it is just a long, deep gash on Bayon's cheek. You're muted.
Thank you. Your blade slices cleanly through Bayon's cheek, and Bayon stands still and brings a hand to their cheek and pulls it back and looks at the ichor that is on their hands. And he looks distraught and turns to Bebium, and Bebium simply says, "This is your fight." And Bayon turns back to you. And points the scepter at you, sapphire end first. And I think you hear Bebium gasp in surprise. As Bayon says, "You could kill me with this. I need to know if you'll spare me or not."
And Talon says, "Are you asking me to spare you?"
I would never ask anything of a mortal.
It's funny because you already did ask me to spare you once.
I think Bayon pulls the scepter back and swings and strikes you once again across the face. And this time there is no godlike force to uphold you, throws you to one side. It throws you to one side, but not as far as it should. This feels like a human hitting you. It feels like a fist. And Bayon moves to stand above you, holding the scepter, and you can see that as tight as they are gripping it, their hand is straining. Their knuckles are white and they're trembling while they're trying to hold the scepter as tight as possible. And they raise the pointed end once again they had resharpened. And they go to drive it down into you. And you hear a voice say, "That is enough." And I think that is where we will go ahead and take our break. So we'll be back in about 10 minutes. Take some stretches, pet your pets, take some meds if you need to, drink water, eat a food, all of the things. Sit tight, and we will be back shortly. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for hanging out while we were gone petting some pets and taking care of ourselves. Um, we'll pick up exactly where we left off. So, you hear a voice call out simply, "That is enough." This is not Bebium. This is not Bayon. This is not anybody that you have heard speak up to this point. You see this shrouded figure once again that seems to have kind of appeared in the central of this entire temple space. And they have their hand held out. A bit of an interesting question, but what would bring Talon comfort right now?
I think simply not being alone would bring them comfort.
Then you would note that this hand specifically is extended toward you. You're not close enough to take it, but it is an open palm. There is no weapon. It does not feel threatening in this moment. Bayon and Bebium very quickly resume a kneeling position, head pressed to the ground. Do you follow suit?
I think so. I think Talon does a few beats after them. Like it's not in any way synchronized with their movement, but processing everything that is happening, Talon would show that deference.
You kneel, and everything goes quiet for a moment, except for the sounds of people in pain, people still struggling and suffering. You can hear wet coughs and gasps. You can hear people wincing and kind of um, just it. For lack of a better explanation, it sounds like people are dying all around you because that's exactly what's happening, and they're dying slowly and they're dying in pain. This entity walks forward. I'm not even going to have you roll for recognize a god. This is Actos. This is the god of mourning. And you've seen her in this shape once before when you had prayed to her. This is the way that she embodied herself. Um, Not many people speak of talking to Actos or praying to her or anything like that because the god of mourning is, while a kind god, is not a god that anybody wants around really. It's a god that comes out when you are at your lowest, when you feel this heavy sense of grief. um I think you would know, since you have connected with Actos before. Actos is also a god that does not require a tithe because everyone is always mourning. There are always things to mourn about and have grief over. And so that is why Actos is considered the strongest god, because there is they are constantly sustained by the grief that people pour into the world. That is just the natural part of being immortal and of living. Actos stands there for a moment, hand still extended toward you, and says, Bayon, I thought you knew better than to throw tantrums in other domains. And Bayon says, kind of in that same musical voice that shakes, and their face is pressed so close to the ground that that gash that you left on them is actively leaking ichor to the ground in front of them, so that when they speak, it sounds wet. And they say, "I I thought that the God Killer was here to take one of us. I felt like I needed to." And Acto speaks over him and says, "That's enough out of you. I know where you stand. God Killer, I would like to speak to you alone." And Actos turns and begins to walk and heads past the altar, kind of into what looks like a tucked away space past where Bebium is. What do you do?
Talon follows. There's a moment of scrambling up, kind of stumbling those first few steps, and he does glance at both Bayon and Bebium as he's going to follow, but this I would say the first time in interacting with any of the gods, Helen doesn't feel forced. This is their choice, and given that Actos has brought them comfort before, given that she stepped in here and intervened, there's no reason not to follow.
Actos leads you to a smaller space, and it's kind of a rounded. I don't remember what they're called. I want to call it a pagoda, and I don't think it's a pagoda. Um, but just kind of like a section of this building where it's a totally round space, and there's not a formal door, but it's clearly a separate room. Um, you can't hear anything happening in the other space while you're back here. And Actos turns to you, hands still extended, but more held up as though there were something in their palm, but hands still extended and open toward you, and says, "You seem very calm despite the display of violence Bayon seemed so insistent on."
Thank you. I don't think that's true, but I'm definitely not calm. There's no way to save those people, is there?
It's not my job to save them. They will live or they won't. That is up to them. Does that worry you?
I mean, yes, because I guess it's up to them, but it's also not up to them. They didn't ask for any of these things to be done to them.
It is a risk that they take, worshipping a god so close to the cruelest god in our pantheon.
I suppose that I want to say I suppose that is fair, but it doesn't feel fair.
I wouldn't expect it to. It's something I think mortals struggle to understand, but I know where you're headed, Godkiller. I know what Kalaris has asked you to do. I have seen that you will do it. You will carry out his request. You will slay a god before they can walk on the earth. Does that frighten you?
Yes,
Why?
because it feels like my path is being laid out for me rather than one of my choosing.
Would it not make the task easier to know that somebody else made the decision for you?
I suppose if you put it that way, yes, but I'm still not sure what decision I would make.
Just like you didn't decide whether or not you would spare Bayon.
Exactly like that, yes.
Tell me, why would you spare someone so cruel?
That feels like a hard question to answer. But I suppose the answer is I suppose part of the answer is selfish. I don't want my hand stained in more blood, but I guess by the same token, if I spare him, my hands are stained in blood anyways. But maybe he was lying to me. I don't know, but it sounds like this wasn't always who he was.
We are, at our core, base creatures. We will always revert to our hunger, to whatever it is that we crave. Aeon could be kind. He craves performance. They like to see celebrations of joy and of music and movement. But when that is not given freely by mortals, he will take it by force. That much of him will never change. Tell me, Godkiller, do you think you could convince mortals to tithe freely?
Talon thinks about Angelfell, thinks about the caves, thinks about the lengths people have gone to not tithe. And so, as much as she wants to say that, of course, people would gladly give performance and movement and the joy that comes from all of that freely, it's different when that's demanded of you. And so he has to admit, no, I don't think I could. I don't think even the gods can, except, as you were saying, by force. By force and by fear.
Really quick, welcome, Raiders. We are talking to a god. And it's not going badly or well right now. It's very neutral, which is, I think, a good thing. Um, Actos nods and says, if I could tell you for certain that he would not change, would you kill him?
I would worry about the consequences, but yes.
And what of Bebium? Would you have him die?
And Helen bristles the slightest bit. They weren't exactly a fan of Bebium before meeting him. And a bulk of what they have seen still fits within that image of just taking more and more and more, and if not given freely, at least in Talon's experience of trying to disengage from him, the use of force in response. So it's with clear uncertainty that Talon just has to admit, I don't feel that I need to, but this is where that question of sparing Bayon, sparing anyone, feels so difficult, because I can't just I shouldn't, I don't think I can go around just killing every god that I come across, but there's so much harm that's being done to mortals, whether they follow certain gods, and yet there is still retaliation if they don't act in all of those ways that the gods want, or if they just happen to get caught in the crossfires I've seen so many times. I don't want it to be on me to make this decision of who lives and who dies. How do you even calculate that?
That is the question, isn't it? Tell me, God Killer, which will you spare and which will you save? You must choose.
Are you saying that one must die?
I am saying that you must decide, and you will carry out whichever you decide to kill.
Then if one must die, I think Bayon is more deserving of that than Babian.
You are filled with rage like you have never experienced before. And it is all directed at Bayon, and it is instantaneous. And you have this moment of realization that this is not your own rage, that there is something happening with Actos that does not make sense to you. You should not feel the way that you feel, and yet something has happened and you do. Actos leaves the room, and you are compelled to follow. And Actos walks back and stands in front of Bayon, and you are compelled to do the same. And Actos simply looks down at Bayon and says, "Your fate has already been decided. Tell me how," and I want to be very clear that this is all at the whim of Actos that this is happening. Tell me how you kill Bayon.
Helen is still holding the small pocket knife that she had pulled out at the start of the fight with Bayon. And she closes it and puts it back in her pocket. And then she reaches for the scepter and takes it from Bayon's hands, whether it is given willingly or unwillingly. And there's a moment where he just looks at it and studies it, and then takes that sharpened edge and puts it directly through Bayon's throat.
I need you to roll 2d6 for me to kill a god.
That's not good. I just need to be reminded of how bad that is. Okay. Okay. This is fine. That's a 2.
Wow, yeah, that's not good. I gotta go look at my notes to remind myself. You pick up the scepter and drive it through Bayon's throat, and Bayon looks shocked and looks afraid. And you can only imagine that that look was mirrored on the faces of all of these mortals around that Bayon destroyed. And gurgling, choking on his own blood, they very quietly say, "You will never dance or make merry again." And they cough, and with a very wet sound, they fall to the ground, impaled by their own scepter. Actos approaches Bebium and says, "You've been spared today. Don't forget that." And then turns back to you and says, "I will allow you one question, Godkiller. What do you wish to know?"
And Talon has to ask because this is a piece they need to carry with them, even if the path is already visible and they believe they know how it ends. And so Talon asks, what will happen if the new god walks the cradle?
Actos's face and body are still fully shrouded. You cannot see any expression, any sort of semblance of what it is that they might be thinking. Her voice sounds very steady when she responds to you and says simply, "Mortals will grieve, as they have always done, as they will do for all of eternity." Tell me, does that compel you more or less to kill this god?
That compels me the same as I have been compelled.
I will not be there to help you make this decision again. You will decide if you spare or kill this new god. But remember that I have seen it done. I have seen you render his flesh, and I have seen you rip his head from his shoulders. And perhaps in that way, you have spared some their grief. And Actos disappears directly in front of you. All of a sudden, she is gone to the winds. And Bebium slowly lifts his head and looks at you and says simply, "Godkiller indeed. You did not tell me you were touched by Actos."
I did not know.
It makes me wonder why. What she saw in you so special to give you this power.
I wish I had the answers to that. But I hope that you will remember the choice that I made today.
It would do me no good to forget, Godkiller. You should leave this city. Our new brother will be walking soon, and I hear that you are meant to greet him.
Yes, I think I've seen more than enough of this city.
The temple doors open. The plaza is still covered in water, but people are not dancing. You can see some people sitting in the ground on the ground where the water was, rubbing at their feet, where they've got blisters and sores and bloodied um, soles. Could not remember what the bottom of your feet were called. Blisters and sores and bloody soles, as they had been dancing nonstop while all of this was taking place inside the Golden Temple. You are free to leave. Rain, the most devout of Bebium, does not follow you, does not go to show you the way, simply lets you see yourself out of Noth if you so choose. Where do you go?
Talon is ready to continue moving, even if it is just to get outside of the city. And so he goes directly back to where he left his bike and his clothes and changes out of these back into those. That is all they pause to do. But at that point, helmet back on, swinging leg over the bike, and making their way out beyond the city limits as quickly as possible because he doesn't feel like he'll be able to fully take in a breath until he does that.
You are moving very quickly, and eventually you do escape the city of Noth without incident, safely and without incident. You are riding your bike, and it's a very hilly, peaceful region that you're in now. The roads stretch out before you. There are not many people on the roads. You have to stop at least once to find rest overnight, find a meal. Um, Sunshine stretching their wings, flying alongside you as you move, occasionally going to rest kind of in the cowl at your back to kind of protect herself from the wind, um, and duck in back there and get some rest. What are you thinking about while you head toward the first cradle?
There are so many things that are running through Talon's head, at least intermittently. I think as they are traveling, there are a number of points where he needs to stop because he is crying too much to see clearly through the visor. And while she does a very good job at hiding that as much as is possible when around other people during those long stretches, as she thinks about everything that has happened and everything that will happen soon. There is so much grief that he is feeling for all of those people who have died, even, and he doesn't want to admit it, but even for the gods that he has killed. Because that's still life that is ending. And more than anything, she is wishing she was just back in Angelfell, in the simple life that she left behind. And that question that Bebiam asked, wondering why Talon was touched by Actos. That stays with him as well because there's something that he can't quite figure out, that he can't quite understand. Because if Actos is the god of mourning, what benefit could there be for Talon to kill a god who would cause more grief?
You are pondering these questions, trying to understand gods, which is for many an impossible task because they never interact with them, they never meet them. And you have now spoken with so many, almost half of the pantheon you have had one on one interactions with. And it feels both great and terrifying to have as much knowledge as you do. It is as you are pondering this, one of the moments where you have not been moved to tears, where you start to see the first cradle. And it is a giant cavern that has been rendered in the earth. And if you approach its edge, you would see that it stretches miles and miles down. So far down that you cannot possibly hope to see the end. The sunlight would never reach whatever depth is at the bottom. People avoid the first cradle. It is a place that only gods walk. It is not somewhere that mortals are meant to be, and yet here you are. And as you approach the edge of the cradle, as you try to listen for the stirrings of something awakening, you hear a very raspy cry from within, and you hear the heavy sound of boulders falling as something is crawling its way up the edge. And before anything can look over and look back at you, you see Actos one more time. She approaches you, and they stand very close. And unwillingly, almost, you feel the tears start to fall again. And she goes to wipe one of the tears from your face and says simply, "Your grief is so delicious, mortal. Thank you for giving it to me." And then she disappears as something reaches a hand up through that giant crater opening in the earth and puts it on the edge and starts to drag its own body out of the first cradle. And I think that is a perfect place for us to end this episode. Thank you so much to our viewers for hanging out tonight. Thank you to Sorting Key for the raid tonight. I hope that y'all had an excellent stream. I'm going to hand it over to JD to do your outros before I jump into channel outros.
Thank you for that. So, yes. Hi, I am JD. You can find me on the internet at JD Not Jason Dean. I have a couple of things coming up this week. I'm just doing it week by week these days because there are too many things going on. So, between now and next Saturday, I'll be over with Live from the Apocalypse for Thy Kingdom Come, our dystopian theocracy game, which is moving towards endgame, and there might be some murder, and it's fine. Don't worry about it. I'm playing a saint who has done nothing wrong ever in his life. On Wednesday, I'll be over with Guild Superior for the House of Eidolon's finale, which is our cyberpunk heist game, and I have been told that I can no longer try to talk my way out of every fight, and instead need to actually use violence. So I will be going in with maybe a knife for a character who is not built for violence whatsoever. He is the face, that is what he is good for. Speaking of heists, on Thursday I will be over with Live from the Apocalypse again for Never Ember's Enigma, which is our D&D heist game where I'm just making a polycule so that we can all work together to be gay and do crime. Then on Friday, I'll be with Folk and Myth for our finale of Vampire the Masquerade, where my little guy there, who has a lot of secrets, just had a bunch of those secrets revealed, and also we're about to fight a bunch of hunters. And this is yet another character who's not built for violence. It's fine. Don't worry about it. On Saturday, I'll be with Tales from the Table in the morning for JT, who runs Entropy Emporium, will be running over there a Grimoire punk game where we are all punks stealing magic from wizards who are hoarding it. And that is going to be a good time. And they'll be back here for Godkiller.
Thank you kindly. I'm going to run through the Entropy Emporium schedule first. Every other Tuesday, They Call Us Villains, our horror mask actual play run by JD. Every other Thursday, God Complex, a Girl by Moonlight actual play run by Will. Every other Friday, Weird Wilds War, a 5e actual play run by JT. And then, of course, every Saturday, God Killer Desecration, run by myself with my God Killer JD. The only game that I am not involved in that has not already been mentioned, because I mostly do things here on Entropy Emporium, is going to be Beacons of Farlight over on High Shelf Collective. We're coming up to the finale of our third arc. Uh, it's been a wild ride. It's so much fun. I have a capybara named Onion who's made out of moss. I have Onion tattooed on my leg. Me, the person Kian, not my character, makes me very happy. Um, so yeah, that game is a lot of fun. Definitely go check it out. We'll be playing again, not on the 19th, but 2 weeks after that. So I can't remember what day that is. Um, but yeah. Oh, motherfucker! I always forget about the raid. We are gonna raid somebody. Just give me a second so I can see who is playing games tonight.
Transplaner, I think, is live.
Wonderful. We are gonna raid We are gonna raid Transplaner RPG. Definitely give them a message in the chat. Let them know who sent you. Make sure that they get credit for those views. And we will see you here next week for possibly our last episode of God Killer Desecration. We'll catch you next time, everybody. Thanks for hanging out.